Welcome, everyone, to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past shows are podcasts. You can find them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your email questions and comments, dj@ArtistFirst.com. Here they are, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
And thank you very much, Z-Man, and I am Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret.
And tonight we are brought to you by the overuse of psychedelics.
Okay.
I didn't realize we had a sponsor, but I think we do.
Okay.
It's this yogi tea. You see, I feel a story coming on.
Oh, no.
Maybe I'll defer. Anyway, one thing that could help out with our topic tonight would be psychedelics. It would prevent the thing from occurring. Our topic tonight is an interesting one because we were watching some video on YouTube not too long ago, and it was very, very interesting. It brought up Margaret had years ago spent some time studying the writings of Carl Jung, who is I think he's acquired sort of he's fallen out of favor in some of his theories, but he still was a brilliant psychiatrist or psychologist. I forget which one he was. But he wrote in The Symbolic Life about what he called psychic epidemics. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight in some regard. And we're going to define that term, but my definition of it would be, or rather my example of it would be these sort of, mass movements which result sometimes in tremendous upheaval and suffering and sometimes tremendous, death. And what would be a wonderful example of one of those would be during the Second World War, Nazism, the rise of Hitler. But Hitler was, although the figurehead of that movement, he was in many ways a creation of Nazism more than he was the person who created Nazism. And largely the underpinnings, I'll just go into it for a couple of seconds, the underpinnings of Nazism were in the First World War and the resulting economic collapse of the country of Germany, and the underlying sort of the cultural underlying of Nazism combined with this tremendous suffering, upheaval, and what Jung calls it is sort of a trauma on a society. Sort of like a PTSD. The German people went through a tremendous trauma, a psychic upheaval, which in essence led them to respond in a psychotic way, in actually sort of a break from reality, a psychotic break, but not an individual psychotic break, which is bad enough, but a mass psychosis. And one term that's been in the news during the pandemic, the most recent craziness, has been this mass formation psychosis. And I think that's similar in many ways to what Jung was talking about. Mass formation psychosis. And the formation part of that, I believe, I didn't really look it up, I believe the formation part of it is that in some ways it's architected. And I think Jung is talking about that here a little bit too, because we'll do his quote in a moment, but he's really talking about the fact that some of these crises, or rather these psychoses, are not just organic. They're architected, they're formed, or they're prosecuted with a nefarious motive.
Well, he had experienced both World War I, World War II, and he wanted to find out how the German people wound up being manipulated into this mindset that basically wound up killing millions of people. And how was that possible? Because any sane society would say, well, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, he even talks about any sane individual would say, well, looking at the actions of this collective would say, no one would ever do that. But we have our most, much more recent historical experience to also look at. But even back then, no one would ever do that. But yet, as a culture in the midst of a psychotic break, it did do that, and enthusiastically killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, really literally millions and millions of people were killed, and the world was thrown into great upheaval and great suffering.
Right.
So Jung, you're right. He was basically looking for, the roots of this, and when you're looking for the roots of these types of psychotic breaks, both in large and in small, you have to look within. You have to look at what we are, who we are, the warts, pimples, and badness that is unfortunately part of human nature. And Jung was a realist in that regard.
Well, again, understanding human nature, and it's not just what seems to be on the outside. This is really the beginning of putting in psychological terms the inward look.
Yeah.
I mean, looking inward is old exercise in many traditions. And most people want to say, oh, it's religious or spiritual. And there's an aspect of that, but it's also acknowledging that it is part of human nature. And what is it that is going on that allows for this kind of darkness to come out? En masse.
And yeah, en masse.
It is going back to the understanding that, yes, you're going to have to understand that darkness within you before you can really begin to understand how it's happening in a large group.
It's, in some ways, I mean, you see it in the phrase in the Bible, don't look for the splinter in your brother's eye or your neighbor's eye. First remove the beam from your own. You yourself. Introspection in this regard, the introspective look, is not to look at others and say, "Oh, how bad they are. How could they ever do that?" It's to look at yourself and say, "What in me might bring me to do that?" Because you recognize that you're not better than. You are you're the same, and that those other individuals might say the same. Oh, I would never do that, but yet, as a mob or as a society or a culture which is having a psychotic break, it happens, and it happens all too frequently.
It happens very easily, actually, when you think about it. If you're thinking of a mob mentality, people just drop away their individuation and just go into mob. Let's all do this.
Right.
And they do it with glee, which is sort of scary when you think of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, exactly. When a crowd turns into a mob, bad things happen.
Yeah, that's and it's an interesting concept. It's like, what is it that happens when a person who, as an individual, would never do something to hurt another person, but when the mob gets together, it's perfectly all right to do that.
Right, or as you saw in during some of the summer protests and so on, you had mobs of people burning things and hurting other people, breaking windows, running through the streets. And I think it's worse in many ways to excuse it, but the better way is what are the origins? Where does that come from?
How is that possible?
And I think Jung might say that that let's say there's a particular subculture, but let's just say the culture in large, that there's a cycle during which a particular group feels either disenfranchised, or they feel terrorized, or they are in some way led towards what in essence is a psychotic break. What is PTSD? It's a psychotic break. It's a break from reality. You have been traumatized to the point where you are overwhelmed, and as an individual, you suffer trauma, damage at a psychic level, and then you reform your concept of reality around what's in essence an unrealistic premise. Everyone's out to get me, right? Say. Well, when you do that to one person, we call it a psychosis. When you do it to a culture or a group or a nation or whatever, a large group of people, it is a self-reinforcing, and it gets amplified because there's a resonance. Resonance is a funny thing. When you have one drum beating, it's loud. But when you have 1,000 drums beating, it's deafening. It becomes an overwhelming amount of energy because it's in synchrony. So you have a culture which is individually or collectively traumatized, and sometimes it's done in sort of cycles or waves. And the German people were put through years of reparations and hell, and maybe justifiably. I'm not saying that for World War I, which then resulted in this roaring, this culture that was ripe for the strongman, ripe for the we are the superior race. We don't deserve this. This psychotic break from reality. This idea that we were unjustly persecuted. That we have to now get our revenge. And then when you move enough people in a direction, it becomes a mob, because it's like now it's self-reinforcing. Oh yes, of course. How can you say that we weren't wronged? How can you say that this isn't justified? Come along. And so you had the people like Bonhoeffer and so on who stood up against it, but that's a very difficult thing to do. You're standing alone against the culture or the mob, and you run the risk of you're losing your life, or you run the risk of being at least ridiculed, shamed, ostracized, being made into something less than human. And that happened in that particular episode. So Jung's, maybe we should read the quote. Maybe if you want to go and get into Jung, but Jung's premise is what's the origin? What's the root of these things?
Right. What I was going to say before was the tendency of a human being is to look out and try to find his or her reflection in another.
Yes.
And if they find the reflection, they basically feel, okay, this is what is real. And when you get one reflecting back at a certain belief, and then suddenly it's magnified by another and another and another, and then you have a whole group of people believing the same thing, they will look at you as a group and say, well, this is our belief, which means that they feel that this is truth, capital T.
Right. This is reality.
This is, you can't have a different opinion because that's not truth. When what you're seeing or what is being experienced is an emotional response.
Yes.
And they've identified with the emotion that rises up, which is, say, that feeling that the German people had when they felt that they were somehow unjustly punished.
It's outrage.
Mm-hmm.
It's a form of anger.
Right. So the anger amplifies and amplifies. And anger is unreasonable.
Yeah.
It's an emotion. There's no reasoning with emotions. That's the main difference between your emotions and your thoughts. Thoughts, you're talking, thinking, trying to understand something. But emotions are feelings that rise up. So the bottled feelings that they had built and built and built. And that's what Tolle's talking about when he talks about the pain body.
The pain body, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a collective pain body.
Right.
And a mob personifies that pain body, which, when you understand it, is a manifestation of this collective emotion.
Right, energy.
And it has nothing to do with reason.
And then I think Jung would say that powers the psychotic break. In other words, that because we have this outrage, and because we espouse, first of all, a victim mentality, but then an idea that we are justified in taking vengeance. See, this is where you run to the victim mentality is a bit of energy gathering. Okay? I'm the victim. I'm being unjustly persecuted. All those injustices, rise up in me as anger and resentment. So that's a lot of power. It's an emotional, and then when you have it as a people, what you have is a reinforcing thing. Of course, it's worse and worse and worse. The story grows. Okay, the story shared and the story grows. But yet you're not at the psychotic break yet. The psychotic break happens when someone, in this case, let's say we talk about Adolf Hitler, but it doesn't really matter. Someone stands up and says, I know what to do. Follow me. And all this outrage and anger and emotion of victimhood can be turned into vengeance.
Right.
And it needs something. It needs the psychotic break needs to have ties in reality, because you don't go into complete fantasy. It needs to have some ties in reality. So you have a couple of places where people say, well, yeah, that's true and that's true, so this must be true. So the assumption of this must be true has a foundation, but then it leads further and further into what is an unreal or a non-real worldview. And if that worldview includes vengeance, then you have a whole emotional power plant humming, ready to discharge into this action, into these vengeance actions. And that's where you get this massive break, and a whole culture moving in a direction which is obviously insane. Mm-hmm. But yet no one, and anyone who stands up is struck down immediately, either killed or banished. And so you learn not to strike, not to stand up, and you end up with a society, in essence, frog marching, literally marching in step to the beat of the drum of the one who is appearing to be the puppet master, but it's really just another puppet, just happens to be the head puppet. But yet it's all being puppeted by this psychic epidemic. It's interesting that Jung uses the term epidemic, because it is like an infection.
Right. It literally is. It's a energy that is looking for a way to express itself, but it's got to have other bodies to infect in order to bring it along. That's
really, really good. And the more bodies an epidemic, and we've just gone through something very similar in the last couple of years, the more it infects, the greater, the stronger it becomes.
Well, it's all based on fear at that point.
Yes, it can be. Yes.
You're looking at something, and you've got a whole group of people that have gone through suffering. And it's similar conditions, so everybody's looking at everybody else saying, oh yeah, we did this, oh yeah, we did that. And then the psychotic break happens when they feel that, well, the outside world is wrong.
And we have to do X, Y, or Z.
We're going to deal with it. We're going to show them that they were wrong.
Yeah.
And the mindset is, well, don't you understand? We understand it better than you people out there.
Right.
So we're going to do it our way. And even though we don't have your permission, we're going to still do it our way. And then you'll come around to seeing things our way.
Right. And sometimes that happens. The infection can spread through these sort of vectors.
It's just that when a people goes through a whole groupings of, what this world has gone through, having to deal with a similar illness or suffering, and there have been losses, and it's the lament that rises when the reality of what death actually is comes in, and then everybody wants to focus in on, no, it should not be there. We have to blame this, as opposed to understanding that death is a given here.
Yes.
It's just like birth is a given, death is a given.
Yes.
But again, the human being doesn't always want to deal with that level of truth.
Well, I would stop you there. I think the being can handle it, but the little I can't.
The human being who is navigating on an everyday level.
Right.
Your ego, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I would say.
Yes. But that's a whole other discussion, the whole integration of a true human being where all aspects are all together and expressing. Yes. What we're talking about is the everyday persona that people put forward, and it's not very deep.
Right, and those are really the fertile ground.
Well, they want to stay asleep. They want to go deep into it. So whatever way I can shunt this discomfort I'm feeling.
Yes.
And then, oh wait, but that must be true because this one feels it, and that one feels it, and that one. So if we all feel it, then that must be true.
Right. The egoic persona that you just mentioned loves getting in step, getting into synchrony with all other egoic, because it gives them an identity, and that's, I think, something Jung didn't mention here because maybe he didn't have those terms, but the infective vector is ego to ego. It's that reinforcement of identity, of we're all this, so we all do that, and this is how we feel. But it's a thing, a group thing.
The foundation of that is always there, though, when you're dealing with a group of some kind, whether it's a country like Germany and the German people, or any kind of group. Any kind of cultural group, any kind of where people are looking at each other going, well, you're reflecting my reality back to me.
You're like me.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, if you're wrong, I'm wrong, blah, 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 blah.
Right. And the element of being able to objectively look at a situation is not really there.
No. Again, egoically, this culture is looking for identity.
Basically, when you think of it, after World War I, the German people were really trying to establish an identity again.
Again, exactly.
As well as try to set up their nation.
Yes. And they felt beset.
Right.
And that was just the fertile ground for this type of new psychosis, because you have this emotion, this raw emotional wellspring, and then you have this identity, that the ego identity on top of it, that looks to each other and say, "Oh, this is terrible. This is terrible. It's terrible. Or, we don't deserve this. We don't deserve this." So it's all repeated, and then it just takes that one spark, a crystallizing, a little seed crystal of outrage or rather it crystallizes the outrage into action. And
well, it forms.
It forms, and then the interesting thing, maybe again Jung didn't go into here, is it forms incredibly rapidly and incredibly rigidly. So it nucleates through this culture. And when you see a state change, and this is a sort of a physical term, but when you see a state change, when water suddenly freezes, it can freeze all at once. It doesn't just gradually freeze. You just have a sort of a microscopic seed, or a crystal can microscopically seed, and then all of a sudden, bam!
Well, okay.
It just sets up.
It's a supersaturated state.
Right.
So you're talking about, psychically speaking,
yes.
The emotions that supersaturate that substrate.
Yes, the cultural substrate.
And then it takes one nucleation, one formation into that, and it spreads, that crystallization spreads throughout the entire beaker.
Yeah, beaker or culture. I mean, that's part of the underlying theory of mass formation psychosis, is that you have this mass of emotion or whatever, and then you just have this one, whatever it is, this little psychotic break that suddenly locks, and it starts to form a rigid or an action-oriented structure with all that power. So you have a ton of power, but it's latent. It's like the ocean. It's just kind of there. And then this thing crystallizes that into a monstrous movement, which you certainly could say the Nazism was a monstrous movement that crystallized really only over the course of really a couple of years, between Weimar Germany in all of its troubles and the rise of Hitler and his brown shirts, which became the Reich. It was a few years. Mm-hmm. And in cultural terms, it was overnight.
Right. Which is kind of fascinating, but that's what Carl Jung was looking at. It's like, how did this happen?
How did this happen? We still haven't done the quote.
Well,
it's almost 7:30. Tell you what, we're going to go into the break and go back to the studio, and then on the other side, I promise, we will do the quote.
Okay. Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Stones and murder. Real murderers need a heart of stone. Meet Maggie and Mike Heartstone, parents of twin boys, entrepreneurs, and now empty nesters. Mike is retired, not by choice, from his position as chief of police in the picturesque resort town of Hamilton. And now his wife Maggie and her shop, the Cozy Crystal, are their only source of income, when a mysterious killing interrupts Hamilton's famous Springfield Park rock show. The townsfolk, the Cozy Crystal, and their lives are rocked to the core. Can Mike and Maggie figure out who is behind the murderous deeds before the town comes crashing down around them? A touch of romance, a little mayhem, and a whole lot of suspense, along with plenty of comedy and thrills galore. Get your crystal magnifying glass out. It's time for some moonstones and murder. Available on Amazon, Apple, Kobo, and other fine e-tailers in ebook and paperback. Out soon on Audible. Get your copy today.
There is a Reaper is the story of 5-year-old Christopher Aaron and his life-changing struggle with leukemia. Winner of both the Indie Bragg Medallion as well as the reader's favorite silver medal for memoir. There is a Reaper has more than 100 Amazon book reviews and a 5-star rating. It has been described as life-changing, spiritual, a must-read. Just released on Audible and iTunes, this memoir is also available in paperback and on Amazon Kindle for only 99 cents. Get your copy of this life-changing memoir today.
The wait is over. First Blood, Book 2 of the Blood series is out. Your favorite bad boy thief, Dev, is back, and the beautiful and deadly Trey is right there with him. She is sharp, sexy, and full of surprises. Their adventures continue as a new power arises to threaten the world. The heart of creation is under attack, and time is definitely not on their side as they battle against their enemies' undead hordes. Can they unlock the hidden power that can defeat him, or will his forces draw first blood? Get all 3 installments in the series. Book 0, It's in the Blood. Book 1, Destroyer's Blood, and the new release, Book 2, First Blood, today. Available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, and most other fine e-tailers. The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed is the latest book from Michael Lyons, the award-winning author of There is a Reaper. Featuring 13 original stories, this wide-ranging collection has everything. Forbidden love, gods versus demigods, weird invading aliens, sexy seductive artificial intelligence, and unusual passion between the living and the dead. All set amidst fantastic worlds of pain and loss and boundless joy. From the sublime to the macabre to the bittersweet, The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed will leave you breathless with laughter, brimming with tears, trembling with suspense. Available now on Amazon.com, Google Play, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. Rick Riordan fans, love mythology with plenty of action and humor? Destroyer's Blood is for you. The new fantasy novel by award-winning author Michael Lyons is Book 1 of the Adventures of Dev Kalian, the Blood series. Follow Dev and his magic sword Betrayer as they are suddenly attacked and forced to return to Olympus to fight in a war they want no part in. The world of men and gods is about to be destroyed by Zeus's ancient foe, and only Dev and Trey can stop him. The conflict never stops, and the amazing twist will have you on the edge of your seat. Act now while the ebook is on sale for only 99 cents. Destroyer's Blood is available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. And while you're there, get the free prequel, It's in the Blood, available for a limited time.
Hi, this is Amanda Gray. Check out my new book, Glimpses of Grace in Georgia. Available on Westbow Press Bookstore, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. More information can be found at my website, www.glimpsesofgraceingeorgia.com, and you are listening to the ArtistFirst Radio Network.
Thanks for joining us on The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Back to your hosts, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much, T-Man. And I promised we would read the quotes. We better do that.
Okay. It is not famine, not earthquakes, not microbes, not cancer, but man himself who is man's greatest danger to man, for the simple reason that there is no adequate protection against psychic epidemics, which are infinitely more devastating than the worst of natural catastrophes. Carl Jung.
And I think we've talked about it, but let's just try to define that term, psychic epidemic, in Jungian, what he was meaning by it.
Well, just as you have a sickness in the body, and you can have a flu epidemic, which is transmitted one to the other. The concept of psychic epidemic was really interesting. because it's a whole different mindset of looking at person's the way a person functions, thinking. What is the foundation of the reality that they're functioning in? And if that can be altered so that someone else can be exposed to that and accepts it, then it can propagate, just like a virus. A virus can be transmitted to another, and it needs a host in order to survive. Viruses cannot live on their own. They must have a host. So psychic epidemics are the same way. They need a host in order to survive. Yeah. And I find it interesting because that mindset needs to have fertile ground in order to begin to reproduce itself. And what we were just talking about, where there is an emotional build, almost like the agar in a petri dish. There's an emotional foundation that is just, there's nothing growing in it, but it's building and building. And then something happens, and this nasty thought form is able to attach itself to this energy or this potential energy or the agar and really begin to propagate. And it needs to do that from one to the other. And that's really, you think of that and you're like, well, what can we do to stop that? There must be a way, because that's unconscious action that is propagated. And you have to take as a foundation that all humans are unequal, or less. There are less valuable humans than other humans. Maybe that's the best way to put it. Because in order to propagate, you're going to have a whole bunch of less valuable humans to try that on.
Yeah. There's a couple things that are wonderful there in what you just said, but that agar is fertile ground. It's nutrition. An agar is a nutritional thing, so it feeds this psychosis, and it also allows it to infect, to propagate from one side of the petri dish to the other. We have well, somebody's joining in here. Obviously, the cat is hungry. But what I wrote, in sort of introduction to our talk on Jung here is maybe germane at this moment. So I said, man is his own worst enemy. And so taken in aggregate, we are yin and yang, darkness and light. Our dual nature leads to both individual acts of cruelty as well as crimes against humanity itself. And these psychic epidemics are sort of almost the worst way that this can flow through a whole people. And it uses all that energy. But to get there, you just mentioned, I didn't write this, but Jung said it as well. To get there, you have to build that energy up to the point where it has so much undirected power. It's like, as we said before, it's like that uncrystallized mass. How to fight it is the awareness that these things, although they appear as sort of this unconscious fertile field, each one of those energy wells is an individual human being with the ability to choose and the ability to act or to not act. And becoming aware of that ability, becoming aware of your own individuality and the fact that there aren't less valuable humans or more valuable humans, which is something that these things absolutely need. They need those who are within the body and are accepted, the in-group, the superior race, whatever it is, and then those who are outside, who are less than human, less than unwilling, undeserving of life or undeserving of equality. Awareness breaks that, because awareness says, my consciousness is just an individual spark incarnate in flesh, no different than any other consciousness. Even those who I feel are persecuting, and maybe I feel I am persecuted, if you, in awareness, look at both those things, those are both unconscious forms, the persecutor and the persecuted, the victim and the attacker, the aggressor. In awareness, you break that. And I think in the video we watched, they were talking about not necessarily at this level of awareness, but to combat a tyrannical psychic epidemic, which has turned into some sort of a tyranny, or some sort of a terrible oppression or a affliction on the world. You have to break away. You have to separate, and then you have to find like-minded individuals who are willing to eschew this philosophy in awareness and build an alternate structure, kind of take its power away. Part of its power is the unconscious. The agar needs to be replenished as this thing eats it up. It needs more and more and more. So it needs to keep people in this pain body mentality. Mm-hmm. This powering me. Keep giving me your power. Keep giving me your anger, your outrage. If you to break it, to sap it, you just need to have an awareness, an actual awareness of reality, of what is, of the truth of things, and then say no. And it's difficult in the beginning, but we all have seen that wonderful cartoon where the first person stands up and says no, and then they're persecuted, but then another stands up and another stands up. That can nucleate and crystallize too. And one of the reasons why when tyrannical regimes see any kind of, like Tiananmen Square, when they see any kind of rebellion or of standing up to the mass psychosis, to the psychic epidemic, they have to quash it instantly, because that's what can really wound them. What can really take them down is when somebody stands up and says, no, this is wrong. This is an abomination that cannot stand. I will not agree with it.
Right. You do not receive this. You don't accept this. It's just not acceptable. The human spirit understands that there are things which are unacceptable if you are a human who values life.
Yes.
The first thing to go is the evaluation of life.
And freedom too.
Right. Well, yes. And all that is linked to that. The ability to make a choice, which is your freedom of choice, has to be taken away.
Yeah.
In order to control you. Your life, if it's not valued by a group, you become less than, and therefore, in that group's mind, they can step on you. Mm. And that's not true either. Right. And the sad thing is you do see this in many places, especially in the on the playground, on the
schoolyard.
Yard. And you have to come to a point, because it happens in the schoolyard mostly because the kids aren't really familiar with their own boundaries and who they actually are. They're still exploring. And once they mature enough, you should be an adult who's capable of standing up for yourself and saying, well, no, that's not right at all.
Right.
But what's interesting is that mindset of being the young child and trying to figure out where your boundaries are, that's being perpetuated. In other words, they want you to be a child and that child mindset longer. And why? Because you're easier to control that way.
Yeah. I mean, part of the video was one of the end games of nefarious use of psychic epidemics, not something that arises, let's say, organically, but something that is engineered or architected, is that you are trying to arrive at a end game where there are a few in power, some sort of a tyranny, and then there are many who are, in essence, infantilized, and because they've given over their ability to be aware and to choose to the directives of the elite. It's like a Brave New World or a 1984 type scenario where Orwellian, exactly, where the state, in Orwell's famous tale, the state, Big Brother, is all, right?
Right.
But that the idea of Big Brother is a wonderful thing because in essence it's Animal Farm. It's all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Right.
It's funny, but that's the basis of what you said before, where you end up with this idea of elites or a hierarchy, where the mass, those who are really whose emotions and labor and psychic energy are powering this thing, are also conditioned to be submissive, less than, not ever stepping outside of the boundaries of what is permitted, never questioning the narrative, and this architected psychic epidemic where you push people into a psychosis, into a psychotic break. You see that in North Korea, for argument's sake,
right,
where that society is among the most isolated in the world, intentionally, where the concept of what is real is so at odds with the actual reality that it takes tremendous belief, if you will, in the system, and maybe it's only lip service, but it's enforced by violence, where the people who are living under the system believe it's the best ever, that this is how everyone should live, that the directives of the dear leader and is his or in this case his every whim must be followed, that there is nothing, it's a Big Brother situation, the party is all, we've always been at war with East Asia, that is the tenets of the party, war is peace and so on, are objectively insane, right? Objectively, from the outside looking in, so this is insane. How can everyone live this? But yet, within this construct, this psychotic break, it appears to be normal. Not only normal, but it reinforced normal. Everyone does it, so it must be right. Everyone does it, so it must be right.
Right. That is the attitude. It's a group think.
Yeah, and nothing outside. That's why the isolation part is so important too.
Yeah, they're basically closed the borders, and they're monitoring very carefully who or what is allowed in, and what is even ideas of any kind that go contrary to what has been established in that country.
Look at the Chinese versus the Falun Gong. You know, they're so.
It's so sad.
It's sad, but again, it's just the ideas. You know, bringing a Bible into China, or bringing in, I forget what their writings are called in the Falun Gong. Being found with these materials on your body is imprisonment or death.
Right.
And because why? Because the ideas, you know, Solzhenitsyn with the there's something archipelago. Can't think of it now, but the whole idea of the whole concept of his book was that the ideas were the most fatal to the state, and they had to suppress the ideas of freedom to get this to continue this psychotic reality.
Right.
The Gulag Archipelago, it came to me.
All right.
Hey man, it's all in there somewhere.
You remembered.
Sometimes at 3 a.m, I would sit bolt up and say, the Gulag Archipelago, and then I go back to bed. It's not easy being me.
Indeed.
Indeed. Anyway, it's the drugs talking, people. Listen, just don't get on me. But in truth, these, you know, we see it today. This is the other thing, which is, you know, people go, oh, well, that was in World War II, that was the last millennium, and so we're so much better now. No. This is the human condition. This arises cyclically, regularly from us. And why? Because it is in reality, in introspection, which was what Margaret was talking about earlier, you have to look within. If you want to see the origins of this type of behavior, this type of psychotic cruelty, it is, unfortunately, but that's not the term, it really is integrally part of us. We are of dual nature. We are here to experience this, to have the choice to do good. You know, oftentimes it says that, you know, why is man above the angels? Why is man set above the angels, lower than God above the angels? Because the angels have no choice but to obey. They have no choice but to do the will of Spirit, the will of God, because that's how they're made. They aren't given free will. They're servants, perfect servants. We are, and it's said many times in the literature of the Bible, we are imperfect servants. We are imperfect on purpose. The imperfection allows us an amazing thing. It gives us the ability to exercise our free will with merit. And the merit is that you could choose to do wrong. You could choose to adhere to the darker part of your nature. You could choose to be cruel. The fact that you choose to be kind is merit. It means that you recognize the individual being in front of you, that they are like you and unlike you, that they are as equally deserving of their rights and freedoms as you are, and that in choosing to respect that, there is merit. You aren't the enslaved good, the enforced good is no good at all. It's if you have no choice, then nothing you do is wrong or right. It becomes wrong or right. A morality exists because you can choose to not do it. That makes it a morality. If you cannot choose to do wrong, if you can do no wrong, there is no wrong. But there's also no right. It sounds like a song. I should write that down.
Okay.
Sorry,
I know.
The licorice.
Mm-hmm. If this place was made so that you can experience the freedom of choice, your will is your own. The challenges, therefore, are these forces coming up to influence your freedom of choice.
Exactly.
And so therein is the experience. And you grow with every interaction of understanding the power of choosing. And to maintain that, you must have that freedom of choice. Mm. So in order to sway a large mass of people a certain way, you have to remove that freedom.
Yeah. It's interesting, that people first have to agree to submit.
Right.
And then once they do, it maybe becomes easier, but no matter what, that's why the ideas have to be so suppressed, because the flame of freedom of choice is written upon our souls, the desire to be free, mm-hmm. and the desire to choose. And even the most crushed, most debased, downtrodden individual who is in one of these tyrannical societies has that within them. And if you just wake it up, if you feed that spark, it can bring the whole tyrannical structure down. So why these societies always suppress that viciously, and why, frankly, they always fall in the end, because the human spirit and the desire for freedom is greater than all of them.
Right. No, that is part of the nature of what it is to be human. Mm. And it is what is not looked at that is the problem. Because what's not looked at, or that building or swelling of that anger, let's say, or that feeling, and not acknowledged, becomes a potential for mayhem to happen. Mm. And with that...
with mayhem.
Yes.
With mayhem of forethought.
Mm-hmm. We've reached the end of our hour. Mm. So I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael.
And thank you for listening.